by the time my boss threw the termination packet onto my desk. The whole analytics floor had gone quiet enough to hear the vents. That's what I remember first. Not his voice. Not the packet. Not even the words. The silence. There are different kinds of workplace silence. There's the normal kind, the hum of concentration. Keyboards. Air conditioning. Expense reports. Deadlines. Then there's the predatory kind. The one that rolls outward in waves when people sense humiliation about to happen and start pretending they're too busy to witness it. That was the silence settling over data strategy on the 31st floor of Vail Systems just after 9 a.m. On a Thursday, Adrian Cross stood in front of my desk with a hard folder in one hand and a performance smile in the other. He was Regional Data Operations Manager. 3 layers above me in title and at least 6 layers below me in intelligence. The kind of man who wears confidence like it's part of his dress code. Navy suit. Pocket square. Expensive watch. Too much cologne for an office where people work with numbers? He had been circling me for 2 weeks with escalating irritation because I refused to flatter him. And men like Adrian always interpret competence from quiet women as a personal insult. Tessa, he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. This is what happens when people forget their place. He dropped the packet flat onto my keyboard. A few of the younger analysts looked down immediately. One of them, Noah, from Risk Forecasting, actually flinched. Monica Sloan, who sat 4 pods away and had spent the last 3 months behaving like she was already on the executive track just because she had Helena Vale's ear, folded her arms and leaned back in her chair with the kind of satisfaction people usually reserve for fireworks or surgery on someone they hate. I didn't touch the folder. Is there a problem? I asked. Adrian laughed. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just discipline theater. He was enjoying himself too much. Discipline is cold when it's real. This had heat. Ego. Audience hunger. The problem, he said, enunciating carefully, is that the chairwoman's daughter reviewed the list for internal restructuring and specifically said she wanted you gone. There was a shift in the room after that. Not because they believed him completely. Because the phrase chairwoman's daughter functioned like a spell at Vail Systems. Helena Vale owned the company in the way some women own rooms just by walking through them cleanly. Fully. Without needing anyone's emotional permission. She was one of those women people in business magazines call elegant, when what they really mean is lethal. She was the sort of executive men either worshipped or resented, depending on how many of their bad ideas she had killed in the last fiscal year. And her daughter? That was practically folklore. Everyone knew Helena Vale had one. Nobody seemed to know where she was. Some said she was on the East Coast building her own fund. Some said she hated corporate life and lived in London. Some said Helena had hidden her from the company on purpose to keep her out of internal politics. I'd heard all the versions. I'd even contributed to a few by staying quiet when people speculated around me in break rooms and elevators. It had been useful. Until Adrian decided to use the myth as a weapon. He tapped the folder again. You should be grateful. Honestly, HR wanted security to escort you out. Monica smiled then. Not broadly. Just enough. There are women who become cruel because they are wounded. Monica had skipped that complexity and gone straight to ambition without conscience. She was beautiful in the brittle way. Expensive offices reward sleek hair. Precise makeup. Heels that sounded like authority on marble. She had attached herself to Helena's orbit early and loudly. Which, at Vail Systems, meant she was either very smart or very suicidal. Judging by the expression on her face now. I was leaning toward suicidal. I looked at the folder. Then at Adrian. Then at Monica. I still hadn't touched the papers. Interesting, I said. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. Men like him hate calm women because calm robs them of narrative. If I had cried, he could have been managerial. If I had shouted, he could have been righteous. But stillness forces insecure people to improvise. And insecurity is rarely elegant. You think this is a joke? He asked. No. I said. I think you're very confident for someone making a claim like that in public. That earned me a little more silence from the floor. Adrian leaned closer. Don't start with me. You've been difficult since day one. You overstep. You question directives. And now the chairwoman's own daughter has asked for you to be removed. That should tell you exactly where you stand here. There it was. The line that made the whole thing too stupid to survive. Because humiliation is one thing. Offices run on it more than they admit. But when somebody bases your destruction on a lie so badly constructed, it collapses under the weight of its own certainty. All that's left is timing. I finally picked up the folder. Termination paperwork. Pre-signed. Routed through HR but not fully processed. Internal note flagging. Executive sensitivity. No formal cause listed yet. Sloppy. Rushed. Adrian had probably pushed it through with just enough borrowed authority to stage the moment before anyone competent reviewed the structure. That told me two things. First, this was personal. Second, he thought no one important would stop him. I looked back up at him. Then I let my eyes drift. Just briefly. To Monica. She looked almost eager now. Like she thought she was witnessing the end of an inconvenience. That was when I asked the question. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just clearly enough for everyone around us to hear it. If the chairwoman's daughter wanted me fired, I said, then who exactly do you think I am? No one moved. Not Adrian. Not Monica. Not the analyst pretending to work. Not even me. Because the moment the question left my mouth, the entire floor realized the same thing at once. Someone in that room had just made a very expensive mistake. The truth is, Adrian Cross didn't invent the lie. He just weaponized it. By the time he slammed that termination packet onto my keyboard and announced that the chairwoman's daughter wanted me gone, the story had already been circulating through Veil systems for years, in smaller, cleaner forms. Not lies exactly. More like distortions people found useful. I was the quiet analyst. The one who never talked about family. The one who didn't name drop. The one who dressed well enough to pass in executive corridors but plain enough that nobody assumed inherited money. The one who corrected forecasting models in silence and sent revised decks back upstream without asking for credit. The one who never stayed long at holiday mixers and never lingered near people who collected titles like jewelry. At Veil Systems. That made me easy to file mentally. Too smart to ignore. Too private to understand. Too still to fear. And, in corporate life, when people don't know where to place a woman, they usually place her below themselves, until proven otherwise. It had started on my first day. Veil Systems occupied 43 floors of brushed steel and chilled glass in Lower Manhattan, the kind of headquarters designed to make even competent people feel provisional. My mother, Helena Veil, had built the company the way other people build military states, ruthlessly, intelligently, and without wasting sentiment on men who thought leadership was a birthright. She started in infrastructure analytics, then supply chain forecasting, then enterprise systems architecture. And by the time half of Wall Street realized her company wasn't just software but operational dependency at scale, it was too late to compete with her cleanly. Inside the company, Helena was not merely respected. She was a weather system. People lowered their voices when she entered elevators. Vice presidents rehearsed phrases before sitting across from her. Men 10 years older and twice as loud came out of meetings with her, blinking like they had just survived hard light. And her daughter? That became myth almost immediately. I had not worked there in high school. I hadn't interned in college. Helena made sure of that. If you enter too early, she told me once, they'll either fear you for the wrong reason or flatter you for the wrong reason. Both are forms of blindness. So I built elsewhere first. Boston, for graduate school. Chicago, for risk modeling. Seattle, for 6 vicious years inside enterprise logistics, where nobody cared whose daughter I was because they cared only about whether I could stop a client from losing $30 million in a warehouse freeze during Christmas distribution. I learned how to survive rooms that assumed I was too young. Then, too, female. Then too quiet. Then too exacting. By the time Helena invited me into Veil Systems, I didn't need a title to know my own weight. But we made one agreement before I came in. No announcement. No internal introduction. No special floor. No executive assistant. No, this is Helena's daughter. Please be nice. I wanted to see the company without cosmetics. Helena wanted to know whether the structure she had built still rewarded precision or had started rewarding theater. We were curious for different reasons. But curiosity can look a lot like strategy when two women know how to keep their names out of a room. So I came in under Tessa Vale. Senior Analytics Hire. Advanced Systems Forecasting. Real credentials. Real work. Real reporting line. No public connection disclosed. At first, it was almost refreshing. The team didn't know what to do with me. I wasn't warm enough to be easy. Wasn't loud enough to be immediately threatening. Didn't gossip. Didn't flirt. Didn't drink enough at team events to get adopted into office politics. I did the work. Fixed what was broken. And sent it back better than I found it. People hate that more than open ambition. Because open ambition can be flattered, negotiated with, seduced, or punished. Quiet competence just keeps making everyone else look approximate. Adrian noticed me the way insecure managers always notice women they can't classify. Not with desire exactly. More like irritation sharpened by unease. He liked staff who made his authority feel visible. People who nodded at the right times. Looped him into emails he didn't need to see. And praised his leadership after he repeated someone else's idea in a louder voice. I did none of that. The first time he openly disliked me was over a demand forecast deck for our Southeast manufacturing cluster. He stood in front of the team, pointing at a projection slide I'd already flagged as unstable, and asked if anyone had concerns before it went up to executive review. Nobody spoke. So I did. 3 of the assumptions are mismatched. I said, if you send this version upstairs, the Q4 labor allocation model will overstate capacity by 11%. He laughed in front of everyone, not because I was wrong, because he needed the room to think I might be. Good catch, he said. In that syrupy tone managers use when they want to pat you on the head while quietly marking you for future punishment. Next time, maybe bring concerns to me first. Instead of making it sound like the whole model is broken, the whole model was broken. I knew it. He knew it. 2 other analysts knew it. But he was not defending the model. He was defending hierarchy. That day, I corrected the file myself, sent both versions into the archive, and noted the timestamp. It became a habit after that. Every revision, every oral directive, every instance where Adrian's instinct for performance ran ahead of accuracy. I wasn't gathering evidence at first. I was preserving reality. With Monica Sloan, it was different. Monica didn't dislike me because I challenged her. She disliked me because I didn't orbit correctly. Monica had built her whole persona around upward visibility. She knew where Helena would be speaking before most people did. She volunteered for public-facing projects, quoted leadership books in elevators, and dressed like she expected hallway encounters to become promotions. She treated proximity like merit. People like Monica find private women offensive. We ruin the system by refusing to audition. So over time, a narrative formed around me. Too cold. Not collaborative enough. Smart. But difficult. Probably insecure. Probably not leadership material. Maybe bitter. Maybe arrogant. And because I never corrected any of it, because I had no interest in performing digestibility for people who read women through convenience, the narrative hardened. By the time Adrian threw that termination packet at me, most of the floor already believed 2 things about Tessa Vale: that I had no real backing, and that whatever value I had could be removed without consequence. That was the mistake. Not that they didn't know who I was. That they had spent so long misreading silence that they forgot some women go quiet not because they are powerless, but because they are watching. Adrian should have stopped after the first silence. That would have saved him. He could have laughed off my question. He could have pretended he misspoke. He could have said there was confusion. That HR had routed the wrong name. That he'd been referring to executive sensitivity and not an actual personal request from the chairwoman's daughter. Any competent liar would have done one of those things. Adrian wasn't a competent liar. He was a man too drunk on borrowed authority to notice when the floor started falling away beneath him. So, after I asked, "Then who exactly do you think I am?" he did the worst possible thing. He doubled down. A few people on the floor shifted in their seats. Noah from Risk was staring at his monitor with such intensity he might as well have been praying into Excel. Monica Sloan had gone very still, which was how she looked when she was trying to calculate whether she should distance herself or stay aligned with the stronger predator. The vents hummed. Somewhere behind the glass walls, an elevator dinged, and Adrian looked straight at me with a smile that had already become too tight to be real. "You're a mid-level analyst with a bad attitude," he said. "That's who you are." There it was. The room felt it. Not because the sentence was especially creative. Because humiliation becomes dangerous once a manager stops speaking in policy and starts speaking in caste. Everyone on that floor knew he had crossed from authority into appetite. I set the termination packet down carefully on top of my keyboard. "Interesting," I said. The word irritated him more than if I'd raised my voice. He took one step closer to my desk. Too close. Now, the kind of step men take when they think proximity will do what legitimacy cannot. "Actually," he said, pitching his voice louder for the audience he desperately wanted to keep. "Let me be clearer. People like you always think competence makes them untouchable. It doesn't. Not here. Not in this company. Not when executive family says you're out." Executive family. He said it like a crown. Monica moved then, finally deciding which side she wanted the room to remember her on. She stood, smoothed the front of her cream blouse, and crossed the aisle with her tablet in one arm. "Adrienne," she said in a tone carefully designed to sound reluctant and responsible, "I told you this should have been handled before she came in this morning." That sentence was for the room. Not for him. She wanted witnesses to hear that she had known, that she was adjacent to whatever internal power this was supposed to represent. It was the corporate version of stepping closer to a winner before the scoreboard updated. I looked at her. She met my eyes and gave me that look I had learned to recognize in women like Monica, pity sharpened into superiority. "You made this harder than it needed to be, Tessa," she said softly. "If someone at the very top wants you gone, the smart move is to leave quietly. There are insults you absorb because they are stupid. And there are insults so revealing they become useful." Monica had just confirmed the lie publicly. Not only that, the lie had apparently circulated far enough among the wrong people that she felt safe repeating it in front of half the department. That mattered. Because what had begun as targeted humiliation was now becoming traceable misuse of executive authority. Still, I said nothing. That made Adrian bolder. He slapped the back of my chair once, not hard, but hard enough to turn heads all the way down the pod line. "Security can walk you out now," he said. "Or you can save yourself the embarrassment and leave like you understand how replaceable you are." That was the moment. Not the packet. Not Monica joining in. Not even the lie about the chairwoman's daughter. It was the word replaceable, because it revealed the real engine inside all of this. Adrian did not want me removed because I was incompetent. He wanted me removed because I had become too difficult to place beneath him. My work corrected his. My silence unsettled him. My existence on that floor made performance harder to sell as leadership. And he needed an audience to watch him win. I stood. No sudden movement. No slammed chair. Just rose to my feet while his hand was still on the back of it. Adrian stepped back instinctively. That was useful too. When men who posture physically retreat on reflex, everyone sees it. I picked up the folder again and opened it in full view of the nearest desks. The HR routing was incomplete. The authorization line carried Adrian's sign-off. Not final executive review. And worst of all, worst for him. Anyway, the note about the chairwoman's daughter wasn't in any formal field. It was typed into an internal justification comment, meaning he had fabricated executive instruction in writing. Monica realized it a beat before he did. I saw it happen across her face, the tiny draining of color. The quick recalculation. The first pulse of self-preservation. "Adrienne?" she said. Lower now. "Maybe we should take this to conference room B." No. Now she wanted privacy. Now, she wanted containment. Now that the packet was in my hands and she understood it might not survive scrutiny. She suddenly wanted the same thing. Weak people always want after public cruelty goes too far. Fewer witnesses. I closed the folder. Then I looked around the floor. Not theatrically. Just enough to make sure everyone understood I was no longer speaking only to Adrian. "If the chairwoman's daughter wanted me fired?" I said evenly. "Then somebody should probably call her." You could feel the whole room tighten. Adrian laughed too fast. "Cute." I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and opened the secure internal contact list I had never once used in public. Then I touched one name. Helena Vale. And for the first time that morning, Adrian Cross stopped looking like a manager and started looking exactly what he was. A man who had humiliated the wrong woman in the wrong room under the wrong ceiling with too many witnesses. I did not hit call. That was the first thing that confused them. If I had called my mother right there, in front of the whole floor, Adrian would have understood the danger instantly. Monica would have pivoted faster. They would have started apologizing, reframing, denying, hiding documents, rewriting Slack messages, pulling HR into containment mode. The whole thing would have changed shape from humiliation to crisis response in under 30 seconds. I wanted neither of them moving that quickly, so instead of calling, I held the phone in my hand long enough for both of them to see the name on the screen. Helena Vale. Then I locked it and slipped it back into my bag. That was worse. Because the silence that followed wasn't just fear anymore. It was confusion. And confusion is where arrogant people start making their most expensive mistakes. Adrian blinked first. Not much. Just enough. Then he laughed. Too loudly and half a beat late. Like a man performing confidence for a room he could feel abandoning him. "Very funny," he said. "You think flashing a name on a screen changes anything?" I didn't answer. Monica's face had lost some of its color now. She was still standing too close to Adrian. But not because she trusted him. Because people like Monica always stay near collapsing authority one beat too long. Hoping they can still convert disaster into access if they choose the right posture. "Maybe," she said carefully, "we should all step into a conference room." There it was. Privacy. That was what the weak always want after public cruelty stops going their way. No. I looked at her, and then at Adrian. "No conference room," I said. Adrian's jaw tightened. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't going to resolve in the familiar corporate way with quieter voices. Closed doors. And a version of events shaped by whoever held the higher visible title. I was refusing the script. That was what unsettled him most. He took another step toward me, lowering his voice now. "Whatever game you think you're playing, it ends now." No. That was the thing he still didn't understand. This hadn't become a game when I asked who he thought I was. It had become a consequence the moment he put a false executive instruction in writing and staged my removal in front of half the department. I slid the termination packet out of the folder again and held it by the corner. "Would you like me to read your note out loud?" I asked. That landed. Not because I raised my voice. Because I didn't. People around us weren't pretending anymore. One by one. Screens became reflective surfaces instead of work. 2 analysts near the back had turned fully in their chairs. A director from operational modeling had stepped out of her office but stopped just short of entering the pod. The way experienced people do when they sense they're about to witness someone get professionally buried and don't yet know on which side. Adrian extended his hand. Give me that. Still no shouting. Still trying to use tone where he no longer had authority. I closed the folder and set it on my desk instead of handing it back. Then I sat down. That was the second thing that confused them. Not because sitting is strange. Because surrender was supposed to look like retreat. Not composure. I sat as if I intended to keep working. As if the packet were merely another bad deck someone had routed to the wrong person. As if being fired by fraud was a scheduling inconvenience and not a personal devastation. People always think power announces itself through motion. Sometimes it announces itself by refusing to move. I opened my laptop. Adrian stared at me. What are you doing? Documenting the interaction. I said. Monica inhaled sharply. That one sentence did more damage than any accusation could have. Documentation shifts the entire air in a corporate room. Humiliation can still be managed. Interpretation can still be fought over. But documentation means there will be a trail. And trails are where insecure managers go to die. You can't record private personnel matters without authorization. Adrian snapped. I looked at him evenly. Good thing this stopped being a personnel matter when you fabricated executive instruction. He reached toward my desk, then not at me. Not exactly. But toward the packet. The laptop. The space of control. Reflexive. Territorial. Stupid. Noah stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. Don't, he said. Everyone looked at him. Poor Noah. He hadn't meant to speak. You could see it in the way his face changed immediately after the word left his mouth. But fear does strange things when it collides with decency. Sometimes quiet people intervene because their bodies move before their careers can stop them. Adrian looked at him with disbelief. Sit down. Noah didn't. Interesting. That was the beginning of the room shifting away from Adrian in real time. Not openly, not heroically, but enough. Enough to make him feel it. I opened a secure internal note draft and typed one line. 907A. M. Adrian Cross initiated public termination using false representation of executive family authority. Witnesses present across Data Strategy Pod C. Then I hit save. Monica saw the secure header format and understood something then that Adrian still hadn't. Her eyes dropped to the screen. Then back to me. Then to the name badge clipped to my bag, as if she suddenly expected it to say something different. She changed strategy. Tessa, she said softly. And now she was doing concern. Which almost insulted me more than the contempt had. If there's been a misunderstanding, we can fix it. Nobody wants this to become bigger than it has to be. Nobody. Interesting word from a woman who had been perfectly happy to watch me get walked out 10 minutes earlier. I stood again. But slowly. Then I took the folder. My bag? And my access badge from the desk and turned toward the glass corridor that led to executive elevators. Adrian's voice cracked behind me. Where do you think you're going? I paused. Looked back at him over one shoulder. And gave him the only answer he had truly earned. To find out, I said. Whether the chairwoman's daughter wants me fired? And then I walked away at an even pace while the whole floor watched. Leaving Adrian and Monica in the exact kind of silence they had tried to build for me. The first layer of truth was access. People think power is revealed by announcements. Titles. Corner offices. Names on frosted glass. Sometimes it is, but inside large companies, real power often shows up in smaller ways. First elevators that open for you. Floors that accept your badge. Doors that do not ask who you are because the system already knows. I walked away from data strategy without hurrying. That part mattered. If I had rushed, it would have looked like panic. If I had marched, it would have looked like theater. Instead, I walked at the same pace I used every morning when I carried coffee past the polished conference suites and the men who mistook eye contact for ownership. Behind me, I could feel the floor still watching. Not because I turned back, Because offices carry attention differently when humiliation fails to land where it was intended. The air shifts. People begin silently rewriting what they think they know. At the end of the corridor, the executive elevators waited behind smoked glass panels with black trim and a security scanner mounted in brushed steel. Most people on the 31st floor used the standard banks in the center lobby. The executive lifts were for Helena's direct office, senior legal, treasury, board affairs, and a handful of people whose names lived in systems no one discussed casually. I stopped in front of the scanner and held up my badge. There was a soft green light. Then the doors opened instantly. That was layer 1. Not the whole truth. Just enough to start dismantling the lie. I didn't look back. But I knew what that sound would do behind me. Half the power structure in a corporation is imagination. Who gets stopped? Who gets questioned? Who is assumed to belong? A green light in the wrong hands can shatter months of carefully maintained arrogance. The elevator rose without sound. 32. 33. 34. I watched my own reflection in the mirrored panel, opposite me dark blazer. White blouse. Simple gold watch? No visible panic. No rush of vindication either. I looked exactly the way I always looked. Which was part of the problem. People expect hidden power to be theatrical. Heirs are supposed to announce themselves. Important daughters are supposed to come with handlers. Surnames dropped like cutlery. Tailored aggression. I had spent too many years learning how useful invisibility could be to give any of that away for free. When the doors opened on 42, the floor was quiet in the way. Only executive floors are quiet. Expensive carpet. Softened footsteps. Doors that close before sound can fully form. 2 assistants at the far desk looked up as I stepped out. Neither flinched. Neither asked my name. One of them stood. "Miss Vale," she said. "She's expecting you." That was layer 2. Not Tessa from analytics. Not some clever bluff that happened to work because Adrian had been stupid enough to overplay his hand. Ms. Vale. My own last name. Spoken correctly and without hesitation. On the floor, no one reached accidentally. I nodded once and kept walking. My mother's office sat behind glass so clean it looked like absence. No gold plaque. No dramatic branding. Just the city laid out behind her in hard winter light, and an office arranged with the kind of severe beauty that says the person occupying it has no need to comfort anyone she intends to outthink. Helena Vale was standing when I entered. She didn't ask why I was there. She already knew. That was how she had always been. My mother moved through information the way other people moved through weather quietly. Continuously. With almost no visible friction. By the time most executives learned a problem existed, she was already sorting whether it was structural, human, or merely stupid. This one, from the look on her face, had already been classified. She was wearing charcoal silk and no jewelry except the wedding band she still wore years after my father died because, as she once told me, sentiment is tolerable if it does not interfere with clarity. On the low table beside her sat a printed folder. My folder. I guessed. Or Adrian's. Or both. In my mother's world, documents arrived before conversations did. "So," she said. "Which version did he use?" I closed the door behind me. "That the chairwoman's daughter wanted me fired." Her mouth did not change. But something colder entered the room. "Publicly? Yes." "In writing?" I held up the termination packet. She reached for it. "Read the top page once." Then flipped to the internal justification note. Her eyes moved left to right with surgical calm. No gasp. No dramatic pause. Helena did not perform outrage. She distilled it. "Sloppy," she said. That one word did more for me than sympathy would have. Because sympathy would have made me feel like a victim. Sloppy made Adrian what he actually was, a small man who had mistaken invented authority for sustainable power. My mother set the packet down. Who else? Monica Sloan confirmed it publicly. The floor heard everything. She nodded once. Good. People misunderstand women like Helena all the time. They think hardness means lack of feeling. The truth is almost the opposite. My mother felt deeply. She simply refused to let feelings arrive before accuracy. Do you want me to go back down there? I asked. That question mattered. Not because I needed permission. Because this had never been only about me getting justice. We had entered the company under specific terms. No public reveal, unless necessary. No preferential visibility. Observe the culture. Test the structure. See what survived when the name Veil was removed from the room. Well, now we knew. My mother walked to the window. Then turned back toward me. No, she said. Not yet. She touched the edge of the packet lightly. First, we decide whether this is a personnel failure, a reporting failure, or a culture failure. That was layer 3 of the truth. I was not just Helena Vale's daughter. I was part of an internal test the company had already failed. And the men who thought they were pushing out a difficult analyst had just put their names on the wrong kind of lesson. The panic downstairs started before I returned. That was the interesting part. I was still in my mother's office when the first escalation hit, not dramatic. Not loud. Just a quiet shift in the machinery of the company that men like Adrian never notice until it begins closing around them. Helena sat behind her desk, the termination packet open in front of her, while I stood near the window overlooking the river. She had already sent exactly 3 messages. No more. She never wasted motion when a structure had revealed weakness. One went to internal legal. One went to executive HR. One went to Julian Mercer, chief of staff, and the only person in the building, besides my mother, who could make an elevator reroute simply by deciding it should. That was enough. At Noah Doazich Shishase. Julian knocked once and entered without waiting for a second invitation. He was 60 if he was a day. Silver-haired. Immaculately precise. And so calm he made nervous executives feel louder just by existing near them. They've started deleting Slack threads, he said. Not someone. They. My mother didn't look surprised. Who? Adrian Cross initiated removal requests from his console. Monica Sloan attempted to recall 2 message chains and 1 staffing comment from the internal admin channel. I smiled then. Small. Humorless. There it was. The first true sign of fear. People only erase what they know can bury them. Julian set a tablet on the desk and tapped the screen once. Too late. Obviously. Legal froze active retention across data strategy 6 minutes ago. It mirrored the channel archive before either of them understood what had happened. My mother closed the folder. Good, she said. That was all. Just good. Not angry. Not triumphant. My mother never indulged in emotions before consequence had finished taking shape. Then she looked at me. Now it escalates, she said. I didn't ask how. I knew. There are only so many ways to read what Adrian had done. If this stayed personal, he might still try to reframe it as a management dispute. If it widened into process failure, he was already in danger. But if it became what it actually was, fabrication of executive family instruction, misuse of HR routing, public humiliation under false authority, and coordinated channel manipulation afterward, then it stopped being incompetence. It became institutional contamination. At Noah Trezitshipatru. The second escalation landed. Julian received a direct request from executive security asking whether I was to be escorted from the building. Not because they intended to do it, because Adrian had already tried to initiate the order and security, thank God, had enough sense to verify before touching anyone linked to executive clearance. Julian read the message once, then handed me the tablet. Per Adrian Cross, remove employee Tessa Vale from 31. Effective immediately. Executive sensitivity involved. Please confirm non-standard handling. I read it twice. Not because I needed to understand it, Because seeing your own public humiliation reduced to operational language has a way of clarifying the soul of a thing. Adrian hadn't only tried to fire me in front of half the floor. He had also tried to have me walked out under a lie vague enough to scare subordinates and specific enough to feel official. My mother reached for the tablet, read the request, and then finally let the smallest crack of anger into her face. Who authorized him to use executive sensitivity language? Julian's answer was immediate. No one. There it was again. Sloppy. Desperate. Arrogant. At Noa Patruzeci Unu. Internal HR called Julian directly. Then legal. Then risk governance. That was the third escalation, the spread. Once enough departments know something is wrong, no individual manager can control the narrative anymore. The problem stops being what happened and becomes who else already knows. That's when fear starts moving sideways through a building. Julian took each call in the same tone. Calm. Exact. Devastatingly neutral. Yes. The packet is in hand. Yes. The note used false attribution. Yes. Miss. Vale is on the executive floor. No. She is not being removed. Yes. Preserve everything. Preserve everything. Those two words would have done more damage to Adrian than a scream ever could. By 9:48. The fourth escalation arrived in the form of a voicemail from an unknown internal extension. Julian played it through the speaker. It was Monica. Her voice was lower than usual. Stripped of polish. Julian. I think there's been some misunderstanding downstairs. Adrian may have acted too quickly. But Tessa is being difficult, and if Helena is hearing some distorted version of this, I just want to say, I tried to move things private before it became disruptive. I almost laughed. There it was. Repositioning. Monica was already trying to crawl backward out of the blast radius while leaving Adrian in the center of it. No apology. No truth. Just distance. These are the people who always reveal themselves most clearly, once consequence starts knocking. My mother listened to the message all the way through. Then she said, Interesting. She's not asking what happened to Tessa. She's asking what Helena heard. That was exactly right. Monica didn't care whether I had been wronged. She cared whether the right person had found out. And downstairs, I knew the floor would be changing already. The analysts would be whispering. The managers would be checking channels. The people who had watched Adrian perform my removal would now be watching something rarer and much more dangerous. Authority reversing direction. At Noa, 9:53. Julian's phone lit again. He glanced at the screen. Adrian Cross, he said. My mother stood. Don't answer. Then she looked at me. And for the first time that morning, there was something in her voice besides precision. Let him feel the silence a little longer. The reveal happened at 10:07 a.m. on the 31st floor, in the same pod where Adrian had tried to erase me. That mattered. It could have happened in Helena's office. Cleaner. More controlled. It would have been easy to let legal drag Adrian into some glass conference room upstairs. Let HR close the blinds. Let silence bury the whole thing under process. That is how companies usually handle humiliation when the wrong person receives it. They convert it into compliance language and hope memory loses interest. My mother chose otherwise. Public lie, she said to Julian as we stepped into the executive elevator. Public correction. That was the only instruction she gave. By the time the doors opened on 31, the floor was no longer pretending to work. People were at their desks. Yes. But no one was moving naturally anymore. Screens were open to spreadsheets no one was reading. Message notifications flashed and vanished. The air had that suspended quality offices get when rumor has outpaced policy and everyone knows something irreversible is about to enter the room. Adrian was still there. That surprised me less than it should have. Men like him never leave early, when they still believe there's a version of events in which staying looks strong. He was standing near my desk, talking too quickly to an HR business partner I recognized from another division. Monica was 3 steps behind him, clutching her tablet like it might still function as a passport out of consequence. Then the floor saw Helena. The silence changed shape. It stopped being anticipatory and became absolute. My mother did not raise her voice. She never had to. She walked through the aisle between desks with Julian on one side, internal legal on the other. And the whole department reorganized itself around her presence, the way trees shift under weather. Analysts stood. One manager nearly knocked over his chair. Even the HR partner straightened instinctively and stepped away from Adrian as if the physical distance might count later. Adrian froze. For a second he looked exactly what he was. Not a manager. Not a decision-maker. Not a feared operator. But a man who had just discovered that authority borrowed in public can be revoked in public too. Helena stopped beside my desk. Not beside Adrian. Not in the center of the pod. Beside my desk. That was the first reveal. Position tells a room what words haven't yet confirmed. She turned to Julian. Read it. Julian opened the termination packet Adrian had thrown on my keyboard an hour earlier, and, in the same measured tone one might use to read meeting minutes, recited the internal note into the silence. Termination justification. Executive sensitivity. Reporting manager states that the chairwoman's daughter has requested immediate removal of employee Tessa Vale. He closed the folder. No one breathed. Then Helena looked directly at Adrian. When? She asked. Did my daughter tell you that? There are questions that invite answers. And there are questions that function as exposure. This was the second kind. Adrian opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried to recover. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. No. Helena said. There seems to have been a fabrication. That landed harder than a shout would have. Across the floor, I saw Noah from Risk actually stop pretending to type. Monica had gone white enough to look powdered. The HR partner beside Adrian now looked like she wanted to disappear into the carpet. Helena turned slightly then. Not toward him, but toward the room. This department will hear me clearly, she said. Tessa Vale is my daughter. No one moved. Not because they were shocked by the sentence itself. Because the sentence reorganized everything around it at once. Every interaction, every slight, every meeting where I had been minimized, every joke about my attitude. Every time Adrian had treated my work like insolence because it corrected his. Every time Monica had spoken to me like I was an obstacle instead of a person. I watched all of that happen across the room in real time. Recognition is sometimes louder than noise. Helena continued. She entered this company without announcement because I wanted to know whether competence still rose here on its own. Today I received my answer. That was the third reveal. Not only who I was, what this had meant. This was no longer an isolated humiliation. It was proof. Evidence of a culture willing to use invisible hierarchy, false authority, and public degradation against a woman they believed had no protection. Monica spoke then. Because panic makes the vain stupid. I didn't know, she said too quickly. If I had known, Helena's head turned. That was enough to silence her. Exactly, my mother said. If you had known. She let that sentence hang. Then she looked at Adrian again. You used my family as a threat. You falsified executive instruction. You attempted removal under manufactured authority. And you did it publicly. Because you assumed the woman in front of you had no room to answer back. Adrian tried one last time. I was acting in the company's best interest. I almost admired the persistence. Almost. Helena's expression didn't change. No. You were acting in your own. Then, finally, she looked at me, not with softness, not with theatrical maternal pride. Something better than both. Accuracy. Tessa, she said, in front of the entire floor. Would you like your desk back? That was the final reveal. Not that I was her daughter. That I had never stopped belonging there. Adrian collapsed in stages. That is how men like him fall. Not all at once. Not with one dramatic confession or some perfect cinematic unraveling, but in layers as each source of borrowed strength quietly steps away and leaves him standing in the shape of his own fraud. The first thing he lost was Monica. The moment Helena said, "Tessa Vale is my daughter," Monica stopped being ambitious and became frightened. You could watch it happen on her face. Her spine softened. Her chin lowered. Her entire body performed the most primitive social calculation in corporate life. Distance from the person about to be crushed. She took one small step sideways. Not away from me. Away from Adrian. That was the first betrayal. And somehow the most predictable. Women like Monica always think proximity is power, until they discover proximity is also liability. She had spent months hovering near executive corridors, collecting names, standing close enough to authority to feel warmed by it. But now that authority had spoken clearly, and what it had said was devastatingly simple, the woman she had helped diminish was not only important, she had been important all along. Monica's voice came out thinner than I had ever heard it. I didn't know she was. Helena cut her off without raising her voice. That is exactly the problem, she said. You believed her treatment should depend on whether you knew. That sentence moved through the floor like cold water, because it was no longer only about me. It was about everyone who had watched. Everyone who had stayed silent. Everyone who had decided that if a woman seemed sufficiently isolated, precision became negotiable, and disrespect could pass as management. Monica looked as if she wanted to disappear. Adrian looked as if he still believed he could speak his way out. That was his second mistake. There's context here, he said. Quickly now. The words coming too fast. She's been undermining management for months. She challenges directives in front of the team. Creates friction. Withholds information. And withholds information? Helena repeated. That was the first time any emotion entered her tone. Not outrage. Interest. Dangerous interest. Julian Mercer, still holding the tablet under one arm, touched the screen and rotated it toward her. We pulled the archive on that, he said. There it was. Context. Just not Adrian's. A thread appeared on the nearest monitor. Then another. Then a time-stamped stack of revised models and approval chains. Forecast corrections. Structural notes. Risk flags. Internal warnings. Tessa Vale had filed quietly and accurately. Sometimes hours before Adrian presented cleaned-up versions of the same insights as his own managerial guidance. A pattern so clear even the interns at the back of the pod could read it. Julian spoke with the kind of neutrality that makes humiliation feel official. It appears, Ms. Now. Vale corrected 5 significant reporting models over the last quarter, 3 of which were later used in director-level briefings without attribution. In 2 cases, Mr. Cross initially rejected her revisions and later adopted them after independent validation. No one said anything. Not because they were shocked. Because they were busy reordering memory. Every meeting. Every glance. Every time Adrian had dismissed me publicly and then circulated cleaner work upstairs under his own name. The second thing Adrian lost was the room. People sometimes imagine public disgrace comes from booze. Gasps. Some obvious collective rejection. It doesn't. It comes from the moment no one is willing to lend you belief anymore. The analysts stopped looking nervous and started looking disgusted. The director from operational modeling folded her arms. Not protectively, but decisively. The way serious women do when they have seen enough to close a file in their own mind. Even the HR partner who had been standing by Adrian now took half a step back, her face flattening into the bureaucratic expression of someone preparing for documentation rather than dialogue. Adrian saw it too late. He turned to me then. Maybe because he still thought some version of the old hierarchy remained available if he could force me into direct conflict. You could have corrected this privately, he snapped. There it was again. Private. That word. The refuge of cowards after public cruelty fails. I looked at him and realized something almost disappointing. He truly believed his main injury was exposure, not action. He thought the sin was not that he had fabricated executive authority and tried to remove me in front of the floor. The sin, in his mind, was that I had not helped him contain the consequences afterward. No, I said. You could have. That landed harder than anything louder would have. Helena turned to the HR partner. Who processed this packet? The woman swallowed. It wasn't finalized through central review. It was routed under local management designation and… Stop, Helena said. I'm not asking how he tried it. I'm asking who failed to stop him. That was when the rest of the fallout began. Internal legal moved in quietly. Not a parade. Not some theatrical march. Just two attorneys appearing at the edge of the pod with the secure stillness of people who already know the answer and are simply arriving to enforce timeline. Julian looked at Adrian. Your system access is now suspended pending formal review. Adrian laughed once. Reflexively, the laugh of a man whose body had not yet updated to the fact that reality had. You can't suspend me based on… Julian turned the tablet toward him. The screen was already red-bannered with access revocation confirmation. New argument. No warning period. No ambiguity. He was locked out before the sentence finished leaving his mouth. That was the third thing he lost. Control over the machinery. He reached for his phone immediately. Probably intending to call someone higher. It's smarter. Or more useful. The screen lit. Then failed access on his first facial scan because security had already disabled device trust under executive review. He stared at it. That tiny moment more than Helena's arrival. More than the public reveal was the exact second Adrian finally understood he was not managing a crisis. He was inside one. Monica tried one last maneuver. Tessa Versen, she said softly. As if the use of my first name might now sound intimate instead of opportunistic. I really think Adrian misrepresented my involvement. I turned to her. She almost flinched. Then you should be grateful, I said, that the company archives better than you lie. Julian didn't smile. But the corner of his mouth thought about it. Helena's gaze swept the floor one last time. Effective immediately. Adrian Cross is removed from supervisory responsibility, pending misconduct review. Monica Sloan is placed on administrative leave pending investigation into complicity and records manipulation. That was the end of them. Not because they were escorted out that second, though Adrian was. Eventually, by security through the same aisle, where he had expected me to walk in disgrace. Not because Monica cried in the restroom 20 minutes later, though word of that traveled faster than any memo. It was the end because the hierarchy they had relied on was gone. No belief. No protection. No audience left. They had tried to make me smaller in public. Instead, they had revealed exactly how small they already were. The strangest part of getting your name back is how administrative it feels at first. Not emotional. Not cinematic. Not even satisfying in the obvious way people imagine when they think about public reversals. Administrative. Forms updated. Access restored. Directories corrected. Reporting lines amended. A series of tiny systems, quietly admitting they had been lying about where power lived. After Adrian was walked out and Monica disappeared behind legal and HR. The 31st floor stayed stunned for the rest of the morning. No one really worked. They moved windows around on their screens, took notes they didn't need, and kept glancing toward my desk as if they expected me to return, transformed as if revelation should arrive wearing different shoes. It didn't. I came back to my desk exactly as I had left it. Same blazer. Same coffee gone cold in the paper cup by the monitor. Same pen aligned beside my keyboard. Same stack of forecast printouts clipped at the corner with my notes on freight variance and inventory drag. The only thing that had changed was that now no one could pretend my quiet had meant smallness. Julian met me there first. He didn't stand too close. Didn't lower his voice. Didn't do that awful corporate sympathy thing where people suddenly become softer around you as if humiliation has made you fragile. Instead, He held out a slim black access case and said, "These should have been routed to you a long time ago." Inside were 2 badges. The first was my existing employee pass, recoded with executive clearance. The second was newer, thicker, matte black with silver lettering. Tessa Vale, Strategic Oversight, Office of the Chair. I stared at it for a second too long. Not because I didn't understand what it meant. Because I did. This wasn't a coronation. My mother would have hated that framing. Helena Vale didn't do symbolic gestures unless they altered structure. This was correction. A visible one. He watched me read it. Then added, "Your mother would like you upstairs at 2. Formal conversation. Not theater." That almost made me smile. Of course it isn't. Julian's mouth shifted at the edge. Not quite a smile, but close enough to count. Then he nodded once and left me there. People noticed the badge immediately. Not because they were nosy. Because institutions train people to read hierarchy on sight. It's one of the ugliest truths of office life. They may say they care about talent, collaboration, culture, but put a different badge on a woman's blazer and watch how quickly every previous assumption tries to reorganize itself around the new information. Noah from Risk came over first. Poor Noah still looked like he regretted being decent in public. But now there was something firmer beneath the awkwardness. "I should have said something earlier," he said. "That was not what I expected. Not congratulations. Not I had no idea. Not wow or that was insane. Just a simple moral sentence." I looked at him and realized that was one of the things I was taking back too. The ability to hear people speak plainly after years of corporate choreography. "You did say something," I told him. That mattered. He nodded like the answer embarrassed him slightly, which made me trust him more. Not less. Then others started coming by. One by one. A director from operational modeling who had barely spoken to me in 6 months admitted she'd used one of my correction notes in a leadership review and had never realized Adrian had stripped my name off the slide. 2 analysts from procurement quietly forwarded me archived email chains they thought legal should see. Even the HR partner who had stood too close to Adrian that morning came over just before lunch and said, with the crisp honesty of someone who knew she had no right to perform innocence, "I should have frozen the packet before it touched your desk." That was the thing about names. Once mine was said correctly in the right room, other truths started arriving behind it. At 2:00, I went upstairs. My mother's office looked exactly the same as it had that morning: clean desk. Hard light. No sentimental clutter. Helena was standing by the window when I entered. City behind her like a live map she had already solved. She turned and looked at the black badge clipped to my jacket. "Do you object?" she asked. Not "do you like it?" Not "are you okay?" "Do you object?" I shook my head. "No." "Good." She gestured for me to sit. Then she said the sentence I had not expected and probably should have. "We were right to test the structure," she said. "But I may have let the test run too long." That was from Helena Vale. Nearly an apology. I sat very still. "Maybe," I said. She accepted that without flinching. Then, she placed a folder in front of me. Inside were internal recommendations, reassignment of data strategy reporting, an external culture review, and a formal proposal for me to move out of pure analytics and into strategic oversight under the chair's office, with authority to evaluate promotion structures, attribution failures, and risk tied to informal hierarchy abuse. In plain language, fix what had just failed. I read the first page. Then the second. "You're asking me to stay. I'm asking you," Helena said. "Whether you want your work where it can no longer be renamed by smaller people." That landed deep. Not because it was flattering. Because it was accurate. For years, I had been doing work beneath the level of title that matched it. Not because I lacked value. Because I wanted to see what happened when value moved through a system without a trumpet attached to it. Now I knew. It got stolen. Resented. Misused. occasionally feared, rarely credited. I closed the folder. Yes, I said. That was the moment I truly took my name back. Not when Helena revealed who I was. Not when Adrian was suspended. Not when Monica lost her footing. Here. In a clean room. In my own voice. Choosing where I would stand next without asking permission from anyone who had once found me easier to diminish than to understand. By the time I returned downstairs, my old desk no longer felt like a holding place. It felt like a witness stand I had already left. And for the first time since I joined Veil Systems, I didn't need anyone there to know whose daughter I was. They already knew whose authority I carried. 6 months later, no one on the 31st floor lowered their voice when I walked by. That was the new order. Not fear. Not flattery. Recognition. It turns out those are three very different things. Though weak cultures spend years pretending they're interchangeable. Fear makes people freeze. Flattery makes them perform. Recognition changes the structure of a room even when nobody says a word. By then, Adrian Cross was gone for good. Not reassigned. Not quietly parked in some regional office to fail upward under a new title. Gone. Internal review had done what men like him always assume only happens to smaller people. It read his actions without sentiment. False executive attribution. Public misconduct. Retaliatory abuse of process. Documentation interference. Managerial misrepresentation. The company didn't need a dramatic ending for him. It needed an accurate one. That was worse. Monica Sloan tried for a softer landing. Of course she did. There was a week where she pivoted into concern. Then a week where she attempted polished remorse. Then a week where she framed herself as someone who had simply been too trusting of bad leadership. It didn't work. Not because people suddenly became noble. Because once the archives were opened and timelines were clear, opportunism stopped looking strategic and started looking cheap. She resigned before formal findings were finished. Last I heard, she was consulting somewhere smaller, where proximity still passed for talent. And the floor? The floor changed in quieter ways. Credit began attaching correctly. People stopped routing untested work upward under louder names. Directors grew more careful about who they interrupted in meetings and who they merely assumed could be spoken over. A culture review sounds abstract when it's announced in a memo. It becomes very concrete when two senior people disappear, and the chairwoman's daughter starts sitting in calibration meetings with a black notebook and a memory for exactly how rooms behave when they think power isn't watching. I did move upstairs eventually. But not immediately. That surprised people. There were whispers at first why I didn't take a grand corner office the next day. Why I kept my old desk for another month. Why I still showed up to model review at 8:15 with the same coffee and the same quiet face. As if the reveal had changed the hierarchy but not the habits. It hadn't changed the habits, because the habits were never the problem. The problem had been what other people thought my quiet meant. When I finally moved into strategic oversight, the office wasn't large, not by executive standards. My mother understood something most leaders never do. Real authority doesn't need visual padding. I had windows, 2 chairs, a long desk, and access to every reporting line that mattered. More importantly, I had jurisdiction, attribution review, promotion pathway analysis, misconduct risk tied to informal power concentration. In plain English, if someone tried to build a little kingdom by stealing work, fabricating authority, or humiliating the wrong person because they believed she was unprotected, they now had to get through me first. That was satisfying in a way revenge alone could never be. Because revenge ends. Structure remains. My mother and I did not become suddenly sentimental after any of it. If you are expecting that part, you will be disappointed. Helena Vale was not built for soft reconciliation scenes by the window. And I was not a child hungry for one anymore. What we did become was clearer with each other. One evening, late, after most of the building had gone dark, she came into my office carrying 2 printed board packets and set one on my desk. They're afraid of you now, she said. I looked up from a variant summary. No. They're afraid of being stupid in public. That almost made her smile. Better, she said. Then, after a pause, I should have ended the experiment sooner. There it was. Not apology. Exactly. That would have been too soft and too late to be useful. Something more valuable. Correct assessment. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. The city was black glass behind her, lit in lines and grids and reflected ambition. Maybe, I said, but now we know what survived without the name. She nodded once. And what didn't? That was enough. The next quarter, Vale Systems posted its cleanest forecasting cycle in 3 years. Not because I was the chairwoman's daughter. Because people perform differently when they realize invisible labor has started keeping score. We tightened authorship trails, rebuilt escalation channels, forced managers to document revision ownership in systems instead of hallway mythologies. Some people called it cultural hardening. Fine. Hard things hold shape better under pressure. As for me, the strangest part was how little I needed people to say my name once the structure began doing it correctly. I didn't need late apologies from directors who had looked away. I didn't need confessions from analysts who had laughed too carefully when Adrian postured. I didn't need the floor to adore me. I needed the room not to lie anymore. That is what I got. Sometimes I still think about that morning, the folder on my keyboard. Adrian's voice. Monica, leaning in with her polished contempt. The whole floor holding its breath because humiliation is one of the few office entertainments people pretend to hate while never looking away from. And I think about my own question. Then who exactly do you think I am? At the time, everyone heard it as a reveal. It wasn't. Not really. It was a diagnosis. Because the deepest problem in that room was never that they didn't know Helena Vale had a daughter. It was that they had built a culture where a woman's value was still measured by how safely she could be diminished until the wrong surname interrupted them. Now the surname is known. The structure is different. And when I walk past the old pod on the 31st floor, no one falls silent anymore. They just make room.